1 minute ago, we witnessed a moment of political rupture broadcast live across the United Kingdom, an incident that has already sent shockwaves through Westminster. Viewers watched as the Chancellor Rachel Reeves reacted with visible fury after being publicly challenged by Prime Minister Keir Starmer during what was intended to be a controlled, carefully managed press appearance. Instead, the scene dissolved into one of the most striking displays of internal conflict we have seen at the top of government in years. This was not the usual polite choreography of British politics. No measured statements, no rehearsed unity. What unfolded was raw and unfiltered, a rare glimpse into the pressure and division at the very center of power. The briefing began like any other, cameras in place, journalists settled. Both Reeves and Starmer expected to demonstrate stability and confidence. Yet, in a move that stunned the room, the Prime Minister attributed responsibility for a projected £57 billion gap in the national budget directly to his Chancellor. To put it plainly, it was the political equivalent of a public reprimand issued not behind closed doors, but under the glare of live television. The silence in the briefing room was immediate and heavy. Reeves remained still at first, expression unreadable. But according to multiple sources present, the restraint did not last. Behind the scenes, the Chancellor confronted the Prime Minister in terms described by witnesses as furious and shaken with anger, demanding to know why her credibility had been sacrificed to shield his. For a figure known for composure and strategic discipline, the reaction was extraordinary. Yet, the context matters. Reeves had reportedly cautioned the leadership for months regarding spending commitments she believed were untenable. Those warnings, insiders say, went unheeded. Starmer, whose political identity has long rested on control, composure, and message discipline, appeared instead as a leader under acute strain. The decision to lay blame on his Chancellor was not simply a misjudgment, it signaled desperation. With markets unsettled, growth stagnating, and public confidence wavering, the Prime Minister chose to distance himself from accountability. It was a strategic gamble, one that misfired immediately and dramatically. Reeves's anger then was more than personal. It was political. And when the footage spread across broadcast networks and social platforms, the perception was unmistakable. Unity at the top of the Labour government had fractured. From whispers behind closed doors to open conversation among MPs, the party now finds itself confronting a very public divide. Some members argue Reeves failed to manage spending effectively. Others accuse Starmer of disloyalty, control politics, and attempting to shield himself at the expense of those around him. But the public concern is more straightforward: the economy. The £57 billion shortfall did not materialize overnight. It reflects a combination of high-cost policy agendas, ambitious investment initiatives, and optimistic forecasting that now appears increasingly unstable. Reeves cautioned the numbers didn't align. Starmer, seeking global momentum and political optics, pressed ahead. And when the consequences emerged, the burden of responsibility was shifted for all to see. Reeves' reaction resonated because it felt genuine. In an age where political communication is staged and polished, the Chancellor's visible anger read as something real, an unfiltered response to what many perceived as an act of betrayal. The implications are serious. Senior Labour figures are already comparing the moment to the well-known Blair-Brown rifts of the early 2000s, fractures that defined internal party politics for a generation. Financial markets, already cautious, reacted negatively. The pound dipped, investors paused. International analysts questioned the stability of Britain's leadership, because at its core this crisis is not simply about accounting, it is about trust. Trust within the party, trust in the government, and trust in the Prime Minister's judgment. And once that is shaken, history tells us it is not easily restored. Keir Starmer has taken a blow that may prove difficult to recover from. Because if you're willing to undermine your own Chancellor on live television, what message does that send to your cabinet, your party, and the country at large? In the days that followed, Labour's communications team worked relentlessly to contain the damage. Official statements framed the exchange as a simple misunderstanding. But within Westminster, few are convinced. This was not accidental. It was targeted. Starmer needed someone to absorb the political fallout, and Rachel Reeves refused to play that role. Her camp has since mobilized. Private briefings, subtle leaks, quiet conversations with sympathetic MPs, these are the early signals of a party preparing for confrontation. And for the first time, the prospect of a leadership challenge is being whispered in Westminster corridors. This is not just embarrassing for Labour, it's dangerous. Labour positioned itself as the party of stability, the sensible alternative after years of Conservative turbulence. Yet here they are, publicly fracturing at the very moment the country is looking for direction. And history is clear. Once the public sees division at the top, that perception is almost impossible to reverse. What happened between Starmer and Reeves was not a routine disagreement, it was a warning. A reminder that even the most disciplined leadership can fracture under pressure. And the pressure is only beginning. When the cameras stopped rolling, the real chaos erupted inside Westminster, advisors pacing up and down corridors, MPs locked to their phones, party aides huddled in corners. Everyone trying to assess the scale of the damage. And the answer was stark. Severe enough to shake the foundations of this government. Reeves had been cast as the scapegoat in plain view of the entire country, but rather than retreat, she went on the offensive. Within hours, her allies were briefing journalists that she had repeatedly raised concerns about the fiscal situation, and that Starmer's office ignored her warnings. The narrative flipped quickly. Starmer, who built his brand on competence and unity, was suddenly portrayed as insecure, erratic, and disloyal. Reeves' response wasn't emotional, it was strategic. She understood the golden rule of political crisis management. Whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. And she moved first. By the next morning, every national front page featured the same image. Reeves, expressionless, leaving Downing Street without a word. But the silence was misleading. Behind it was momentum. Senior ministers quietly reached out in support. Longtime Starmer loyalists stopped returning calls. This wasn't about economic forecasting anymore. It was about trust. And trust had been broken. That night, Labour headquarters descended into one of the most volatile internal crises in recent memory. Emergency meetings ran into the early hours. Some advisors argued Starmer needed to apologize to prevent further instability. Others insisted backing down would project weakness. Starmer chose neither path. He stalled releasing a vague statement about collective responsibility. The hesitation only deepened the crisis. Reeves' allies escalated. Internal documents, briefing notes, and fiscal projections surfaced revealing she had issued repeated warnings about unsustainable spending and unrealistic growth assumptions. The picture that emerged was damning. Starmer knew the risks, but pressed ahead for political gain. Market confidence wavered. Analysts began questioning the government's credibility. If the Prime Minister and Chancellor can't agree on the numbers, one commentator noted, why should investors trust either of them? But beyond the economics, the political fallout was even more severe. Discontent that had simmered quietly among MPs now found a focal point. Reeves became a symbol of resistance within Labour ranks. Suddenly she was no longer a scapegoat. She was a survivor. The Conservatives, predictably, seized the moment. One MP quipped that Labour didn't need opposition, it was doing the job itself. Public perception followed suit. Starmer's approval ratings slid. Cabinet meetings grew tense and silent. Advisors questioned his judgment in private. And through all of it, Reeves held her ground. I won't be the fall girl for bad math and bad leadership, she told allies, and the country heard her. This was the kind of open defiance Britain has not seen from a chancellor in decades. In pubs, offices, and group chats across the country, people weren't debating budget spreadsheets, they were debating loyalty, betrayal, and whether Starmer could still be trusted. The man who promised unity had become the face of division. Political historians drew comparisons to Blair and Brownah's rivalry, rooted in ambition and mistrust. But this time, the conflict played out publicly, online, and in real time. Clips of Reeves' reactions circulated across TikTok and X, amassing millions of views. Hashtags like #ReevesVisStarmer and #LabourMeltdown dominated the conversation. In a media-driven age, perception is power, and Reeves had seized it. Even international networks began covering the story, calling it one of the most significant political breakdowns in recent British history. But behind the spectacle lies a deeper problem. Confidential reports indicate that Labour's fiscal challenges go beyond the widely discussed £57 billion gap. Reeves' concerns weren't political maneuvering, they were grounded in hard financial realities. And as these details emerged, Starmer found himself increasingly isolated. Some of his closest advisors quietly began preparing exit strategies. Then came the whispers, the kind that can end governments. A leadership challenge. Several senior figures have begun quietly testing support within the parliamentary party. And while Reeves is not openly campaigning, she is not discouraging the speculation either.